Hello everybody, welcome to number 27. I'm Jack and today I'm going to talk to you about the Jaguar XJ series. Now this is a fascinating car because it was the best car in the world when it came out. It should have propelled Jaguar into becoming what nowadays would be the dominant force in terms of luxury cars. It should have been, ahead of Mercedes, ahead of BMW, and yet this car, if anything, actually precipitated Jaguar's decline in some ways. I'm going to tell you all about that. But first, I need to tell you a little bit about how it drives and why it was just so incredibly revolutionary at the time. So the XJ series came out in 1969 to absolute rave reviews. Now this car, in one way, was really like the Lexus of its time. That one way was that in terms of comfort and refinement, it really put the wind up the other luxury makers because these cars were incredibly quiet. The ride was fabulous. They were brilliant things to drive. Not only that, but they were actually very cheap. Now, one of the issues that I was referring to that really unfairly hobbled this car was labour relations at the time. Now, whether they were just or unjust, it's undeniable that there were a lot of strikes at that point in time, and that meant that this hobbled the XJ series in two ways. First of all, it came out and it was such a brilliant car that absolutely everybody wanted to have one, so they needed to increase capacity or at least maintain capacity. Yet from day one, production was constrained by regular strikes. They were at least every month, if not more frequent than that. The other problem with the strikes was that not only did they hinder production, but they also hindered quality. And the fact that the labour force was so unhappy also had a negative effect on the quality of the cars. First of all, it was the XJ6, the six-cylinder that was released. In '72, the V12 version, the XJ12, like this one, that was released. And again, what an incredible car. Now, if you look at, it was really the best luxury car in the world. Perhaps not in terms of build quality, but in every other way, if you got a good one, they were incredible. But they were also incredibly cheap. So £9,600 I think they retailed for when they first came out. It was really the first mass-produced V12, and although it wasn't available for the average layperson, it certainly meant that these cars opened up to a market that had never previously ever considered anything as esoteric as a V12. But also you need to understand just how cheap it was in comparison to competitors. The Merc, the 6.9 litre Merc, the SEL I think it was, that was £22,000, more than double the cost of this, and it wasn't even a V12, and performance was pretty much comparable. Yes, they were much better built, they weren't as refined, they didn't ride as well. A Lamborghini Miura of the time was £17,000, and yet this was only half a second off in terms of 0 to 60. The V12, when it came out, the first version of the Series 2 car, that had 255 horsepower, I think. That was enough to get this from 0 to 60 in 7.4 seconds and on to well in excess of 140 miles an hour. So quicker than many sports cars. Now, even a Silver Shadow 2 was about £8,000 more expensive than this car, and yet this was more refined. So it should have absolutely been a world beater. Unfortunately, it turned into a bit of a missed opportunity. Let's talk a little bit about this car because it is fantastic. It's quite a low mileage car, 67,000 miles. It spent 20 years in Sweden and then 10 years in Norway. And incredibly, the owner has even kept a diary of every single journey that he took, the last owner that is, before it came back to the UK. So this is a really nice example, and I can tell you that the reports from the time were not overblown. It is incredibly quiet. You can really hardly hear the engine, and it's so smooth, it's so creamy, and it is just, the torque is ever present. So wherever you are, whatever the revs, if you put your foot down, it responds instantly, but in a really nice, civilized way. It just picks up and wafts forward. It's quite an addictive thing, actually. The steering is uber light and has absolutely no feel that I can detect at these speeds, but that's not really a problem in a car like this, and it is true that you can steer it with your fingertips. But what for me stands out is just the way it rides. And it's not only that it rides well, because yes it does, but it's the way in which it controls the car. Now, it's not a car to be driven quickly, but when you drive at sort of speed limit speeds, so this is a 50 or a 60, the way the car moves around, the way it dampens movement is just phenomenal. It's brilliant. Now, they also had some interesting features, these. This is the Series 2, and I think it's the only car in the world that was actually made prettier by US crash regulations, which meant that the bumpers had to be raised. So for the Series 2, for this car, the front bumper had to come up, which meant that the grille had to be made smaller. And to me, at least, it looks way better than it does with the original Series 1 grille. Now, the interior to me feels very nice. It doesn't feel, these have a reputation for having been built quite badly and being a bit shoddy, but I have to say that for me at least, the interior does not feel at all shoddy. The buttons, for example, here, the windows, that's quite a nice sort of, it has a nice feel to it. Maybe it doesn't look like a, it doesn't look like a high quality item, but it feels nice to the touch. There's some weird stuff here. Does anyone know this Lucas thing for the stereo? What was it at the time? This is quite an interesting thing. Also, it has a little pool switch here at the front. And apparently one of the defects of the Series 1 was that it was ventilation didn't quite work as well as it should. So for the Series 2, they introduced this quirky little switch that you'd pull, and it opens up little vents just under the headlights that bring in fresh air. Many of you will also know the other thing about this is that it had twin fuel tanks, but they're not connected. So there's a little button here, fuel, and if you press that, then it'll switch between the right and the left tank. The seats are really comfortable, the leather is lovely. It has one of those smells which all these cars of these different eras, they have these particular smells which are so much part of the experience, and this in particular, and it's a bit like some of the smells that some of the luxury boats have. I'm not talking about mold or dampness. It's just got, I don't know, it's that sort of smell of glue maybe, and leather and craftsmanship. Wow. The steering is very vague. Again, not a criticism, it doesn't matter in a car like this. But as well as having no feel, it's quite slow, it's quite vague. It is no sports car, and it's not supposed to be. But really, if you are calm, smooth and collected, it's quite fun to drive it, because you kind of have to sort of point it and sort of squirt it towards the corner and just do everything in slow motion. But what a cool thing. Now, the XJ really was a brilliant car, and it should have been Jaguar's saviour, and it wasn't, and I sort of hinted about all this before. And one of the reasons was obviously to do with the strikes and the lack of production, so they couldn't quite capitalise on it as much as they should have. I mean, the car was so good that it carried on being developed and being sold until, I think, 91 or 92 in the Series 3. So it was a brilliant car for its time, but it was hobbled, as I said, because Jaguar couldn't produce enough to maximise their profits. But it was particularly hobbled by the quality. Road and Track, I think an American magazine, when tested, said, yeah, brilliant car. However, this is a brand new test car. They could already see issues with the paintwork. The dash already showed signs of wear, and they said that the body panels didn't fit very well. Autocar, it was the same thing. These cars basically suffered very much from the fact that if you got a good one, it was absolutely brilliant. If you got one that maybe had been through a strike, so it had been built by different people, there'd been a bit of a gap between the build and so on, or there had been problems with the suppliers of the parts, and you'd receive some substandard stuff, then you would have a plethora of things could be wrong, from, you know, electrical issues, there were problems with the locks, problems with ill-fitting parts, but also in terms of fit and finish, especially the bodies were absolutely, it was the worst, even by the standards of British Leyland, who owned Jaguar at the time, and that's saying something. Now, part of the reason for that is that the body shop that Jaguar had was already 25 years old, and Jaguar was in dire need of some investment. Now, although they couldn't produce as many of these as they needed to, they still produced enough to make a healthy profit. But between 69 and 74, 25 million pounds went from Jaguar into Longbridge, the British Leyland plant. The money was taken and basically used and went down a bottomless pit, which meant that Jag couldn't invest that money that it really badly needed in things like, for example, with that money at the time, 25 million was quite a lot. Jag could have bought a badly needed new shop, you know, a new paint shop. It could have helped to sort of retain the best people and the best engineers by paying them proper salaries. But because that money was, in a way, I don't know if pilfered is the right thing, but certainly rather than stay with Jaguar, it was taking elsewhere in the group and utterly wasted. It meant that this opportunity for Jaguar to become a class-leading company was squandered. And it's such a shame, because in terms of the product itself, the design of it, it had so much potential. It was so good. Still today, it is an absolutely incredible car that in terms of luxury really doesn't disappoint at all. And yet it was all lost. Now, this Jag is owned by Angelo. Angelo is Italian and has owned a Ferrari 400. And yet he says that he prefers this as a car, and that should tell you everything, because most Italians, we are pretty passionate about our national marques, and especially Ferrari. I think he's sort of in two minds, thinking perhaps about selling it. Like me, he likes to sort of experience different things. He's not 100% sure, but if you're interested, I'll put his email in the video description. I think the car owes him about 13,000. I don't know what he's going to sell it for, but it seems like a really good car. So if you're in the market for one, I'm sure this is worth looking at. Thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you want to support the channel, there's a Patreon link in the video description. And if you have an interesting car that you want me to do a review on, please contact me. Instagram is the best way. Thank you so much for watching, and see you for the next video.